ever had a moment that you really looked forward to, that you were really excited about? Like maybe something that you dreamed of and you planned for. Like maybe it could be like buying your first home, where you had saved up and you were so excited, this is our place. And you get in month 1, the water heater breaks. Or literally the first year, the property tax is double. Anybody? Or maybe it's something just a little more simple, like you just wanted like a low-key game night, like a family game night, where everybody can just be, like we can laugh together, connect, have a great family night, only to end up where someone's crying over Monopoly. Or maybe you spend time learning how to make the perfect steak. You stand in front of the grill and you are so excited because this is going to be perfect, and you serve it to your family to only have them ask where the ketchup is. Maybe you finally got that promotion that you wanted, and now you're sitting in a meeting and you're realizing, I'm in a meeting now about meetings. How did this happen? Or maybe you planned a very expensive family vacation, and so that's what we did. When Sal and I were growing up, we had never been to Disney World. So one of our goals as soon as we became parents was to start saving up so we could take our boys to Disney when they were 4 and 5 years old. And we did that. And this was a cute moment. But there was another moment where Sal is standing in front of Cinderella's castle. The boys are sobbing and exhausted, and he is gritting his teeth, and he is looking at them, and he is like, you will stop this right now because this is the happiest place on earth, right here. That is where we are. We're starting a conversation over the next couple of weeks just about marker moments, about how God uses certain moments to mark our lives. And then when we bring these moments back into our memory, they actually shape who we are today. We are actually collectively experiencing a marker moment too with our move to our new building. And we didn't want to have this conversation without having you pause and consider, what moment might God be marking right now in your life? What could be something that's happening right now that you're trying to rush through, but it's actually a moment? Marker moments are those times that life is interrupted, and it's almost as if it says, like, hey, stop, pause, pay attention, because right now something is happening that I'm going to want you to remember. Now, we're about to make this move, and in some ways, we're going to move similar to another epic move story that's told in the Old Testament, because we are kind of collectively moving, like a couple of thousand of us are moving to a new church home. And so I felt like it'd be appropriate this morning to spend some time looking at another historical move, the move of ancient Israel from Egypt into the Promised Land. Now, you may be very familiar with this story, or maybe you've just heard about it in bits and pieces, like you know who Moses is a little bit, you've heard of the parting of the Red Sea, or maybe you've seen one of these movies, so you know the story. But we wanted to spend some time this morning looking at it together. Now, I have condensed it, so it's a big story. It spans several books in the Old Testament, tons of chapters, several generations. So I've tried to condense it, and I want you to see if you can pick up on a theme that I'm trying to highlight here as we look at this story together. The people of ancient Israel at this point have been enslaved in Egypt for well over 400 years. They've been there oppressed, beaten, and exhausted for over 400 years. And we read this: they groaned because of their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help reached God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, a while before this moment, God has made a promise to Abraham. And his promise was to give Abraham and his descendants land, as well as to use Abraham and his descendants to bless the entire world. Now that promise then gets handed down to Isaac, Abraham's son, and then gets handed down to Jacob. So we span several generations. And while that promise is waiting to be fulfilled, there's lots of things that happen. People rise and fall in power. Israel gets conquered several times. They conquer other people several times. All sorts of things happen. And then there is a baby that is born, almost killed, but rescued and raised in an Egyptian palace. This is Moses. And Moses commits a crime in Egypt and then flees to the desert, and that's where he meets God. And God says this: I have seen the misery of my people. I have heard them crying out, and I have come down to rescue them. God sends Moses back to Egypt from where he had fled. And then through Moses, God confronts Pharaoh multiple times. If you've ever heard of all the different plagues in Egypt, that is this part of the story. Gives Pharaoh multiple opportunities, and through all these moments, you can see that God is faithful to the Israelites. God is powerful. And then there is this one night that Pharaoh gets one more chance to release the Israelites, and he does not. And one final and terrible plague happens, and then Pharaoh decides to release the Israelites. And we read this: that same day the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt. Now that night is what Israel will forever call the Passover. This is still a marker moment that Jewish tradition celebrates. So they mark this moment forever. And right before they start to move out, they've been released by Pharaoh. And right before they start to move out, we read this. The Israelites Pharaoh starts to pursue them. God says, this day shall be for you a memorial day throughout your generations. Pharaoh chases them. God parts the sea. The Israelites went through the sea on dry ground. And then when they're safe, the people worship. The move continues. They wander for 40 years. And throughout this 40 years, they're provided food and water and guidance from God. And then he repeatedly tells them, remember this day in which you came out of Egypt. He tells them over and over, remember, actually, you got to tell these stories to your children over and over. You need to make sure your children remember. I want you to write this moment on the doorpost. I want you to write it on your forehead, put it on your hand. You've got to remember. That years later, Israel prepares to enter the promised land, and Moses reminds them again, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness. And then he warns them, be careful that you do not forget the Lord when you eat and are satisfied and your heart becomes proud. See what I'm starting to highlight here? There is this theme throughout the move for ancient Israel, and I think it's a theme for us this morning, that God values and desires us to remember. The command to remember is actually found over 120 times in the Bible. There is something that God is trying to say when he repeatedly says, I need you to remember. If you add the different variances in the Bible, you would see the word comes up over 200 times. There's something to us remembering. In fact, God kind of says, actually, the problem is, the warning is that you might forget. God names forgetting as the danger. He says, be careful that you do not forget. Because you're going to eat and be satisfied, you're going to get comfortable, and your heart's going to become proud, and you might forget. There's this echo across this whole story, and I think really across the whole Bible, where God says, you've got to remember. But the way that we understand the word remember and the way that ancient Israel would have understood it is just different a little. See, for us, we get our word remember from the Latin, which is rememor, just mean to be mindful again, to bring back to mind. To remember for us means to bring back to mind. We can recall dates and data and information to think back, but the word in Hebrew would have had a little nuance. The word remember that Israel would have been familiar with is actually zakar, which actually is a little different. It means to bring back to mind with intention and to act on behalf of. So in other words, that means for us, we think of, if I'm going to remember something, I'm just going to recall information from the past. But for Israel, remember would have been, we're going to bring the past into the present to let it shape right now. Zakar is to re-enter the story so that it tells us what we need to know about the present. God is telling ancient Israel, I don't want you to just move out of Egypt. I want you to carry the memory of what happened with you because it matters. I'm not just trying to move you out. I'm trying to influence how you move in. But we culturally have kind of drifted from this idea, this concept of even like rites of passage. We used to have way more than we do now. Most cultures now, we've got a wedding and we've got a funeral. Maybe a baby shower sprinkled in the middle somewhere. But there are these moments that we don't stop and mark, intentionally stepping from one chapter to another, purposely. But Israel would have understood that. In fact, they already had weekly marker moments. They had practices and moments they would have stopped to remember every week. They had monthly marker moments. And at this point in their history, they had over 7 festivals that they would have regularly stopped annually to remember. God invites Israel to remember, so it shapes how they move forward. God invites his people to mark moments because he knows that we will forget, and he doesn't want us to forget who he is. Remembering matters. To remember wasn't just to recall, like it is for us, just to bring back data and information. It was to live in light of what we remember. But just like with ancient Israel, not only are we prone to forgetting, we also don't really remember correctly most of the time. In fact, research shows that 50% of new information that you're given will be out of your brain within the first hour. Some of you are like, that makes so much sense now. Don't nudge anybody right next to you. By the way, don't do that. But actually then 70% of that new information is actually gone in the first 24 hours. Unless you write it down, make a mark, note it, unless you are intentional about what you remember. And I believe, like ancient Israel would have, that the things that you choose to remember, the things that you choose to allow to mark moments in your life influence how you view yourself and how you view God. Because we will forget, but we will also forget incorrectly, and we are not that different than Israel. Israel really quickly does this. Now remember, they've been in slavery for over 400 years. They get rescued from that, and we read, right? They groaned because of their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help reached God. And not too long after that, we read this. Israel's crying out again, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also, there were cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlics. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. We sat around pots of meat there, but you brought us out here to starve. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? See, in the midst of their frustration, they're reflecting back without clarity already. We do the same thing all the time. Just the other day, I have 2 adult sons, and I overheard them telling someone, they're literally having this conversation. They said, our mom never took us anywhere. I'm so sorry. My mom never took us to the grocery store. My dad did everything. I said, I'm sorry. No, then I said, you never even rode a bus till middle school. I picked you up from school every single day, and I can tell you how many times we went to Kroger's. I know exactly where we went. We went to a ballpark if we weren't going there, and they were as sincere as could be. They weren't trying to be like rude or funny. They were just sincere. They were like, no, you never took us anywhere. Dad had to deal with us all the time. You never had to take us anywhere. Now that's like a silly example of remembering incorrectly. By the way, boys, that's incorrect. It's incorrect. Ask your dad. But make sure I'm there when you ask, because I want to hear the response. Now, that's a silly thing that doesn't really have a lot of implications, but sometimes if we aren't intentional about what we remember, we will distort something. I have a friend who for a long time was in a dysfunctional relationship. She was cheated on, lied to, and manipulated. And she would finally be done, and she would be like, I've had enough. It's done. I'm done. And then she'd get lonely. And then she'd get lonely for a little while longer, and then the loneliness got hard. And then all of a sudden, the story rewrote itself. All of a sudden, the past was a little distorted. And she would talk about, no, it really wasn't that bad. I can remember her telling me that one time one of her counselors said, hey, can you explain to me exactly what you miss? Do you miss the lies? Do you miss the drama? See, if we aren't intentional about what we remember, we will distort our past. We will twist it. We will rewrite the story differently. And I think if we aren't intentional about how we remember God, we could unintentionally distort God as well. We could miss God. What moment right now would you say you have marked as your definition of God? What moment has been marked in your life that is really how you see God because of what happened in a certain moment? And is it possible that it's slightly distorted? God invites his people to mark moments so we don't forget who he is. And God invites his people to mark moments so we don't forget what he's done. Jesus would have been more than familiar with marker moments growing up in the Jewish tradition. And we see this moment with Jesus where he is going to bring a group of people together around him, his closest friends, and he's going to mark another moment that's very much attached to ancient Israel. I want to look at this moment together. Paul reflects on it in his letter to the church at Corinth. It says this, the Lord Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, took bread, broke it, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after supper, he took the cup and he said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat of this bread and you drink of this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. This is a marker moment. It's actually a marker moment on top of another marker moment. Jesus has gathered this group to celebrate Passover. My guess is they did this every year. But in this one moment that we have the record of, it's different. Jesus is saying, I'm stepping into this Israel's remembering tradition, and I am recentering it. I am completing it. I am fulfilling it. And I need you to sit and do this with me because I know what's going to happen starting tomorrow. I know that you will forget. So I need to take this moment and mark it with you. We read in Luke's recording of it, he says, he took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it. Gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Jesus knows his disciples will forget. So he gives them what? A great story? He gives them what? Just a nice principle to live by? He gives them a practice. He gives them something to do so they won't forget. We mark moments so we can be reminded of who Jesus is. In this moment, and you got to remember, the people that are surrounding Jesus in this moment would have, much like Jesus, grown up under Jewish tradition. So what he's doing in this moment is actually really radical, that he's standing here and he's saying, hey, this thing that you have seen us do for thousands of years is something I'm going to do right now and explain to you how this fits in what I'm doing. What Jesus is stepping in and saying, this is a moment that's going to mark and remind you that God is for you and with you, always has been and always will be, because we chose and we continue to choose to live outside of God's design, to miss the mark, to sin, to stray, to do things our own way. That fractures our relationship with God. And Jesus is saying, hey, what I'm doing right now is restoring that relationship. That by my wounds you will be healed. It's not something you earn. It's not something you can go and grab and earn and climb a ladder to get to. It's just something that you can choose to accept or not, that you can trust or not. But that through my body, through my life, my death, and my resurrection, you can choose to remember who you are in God. See, we still take communion because we forget that. You know, just the other day, I found myself in a super stressful, frustrating dynamic in my conversation with God, and all of a sudden I just I do remember, though, when I was in college, in my apartment, by myself, the night that I was like, I think I'm just done doing things my way. I think I need you to take over. But see, the world likes to distract me with busyness and stress and anxiety and anger. And Jesus kind of goes countercultural to that with this moment. And he says, I'm going to give you a practice to help you remember. God invites his people to mark moments, to remember who he is, to remember what he's done, because it will remind you of who you are. Because you will forget. You'll drift. You will need to be re-anchored. You will need to be reminded. The first church I ever attended regularly, and it ended up being the first church I ever worked for, was a Methodist church, Good Shepherd United Methodist Church. And when I was on staff there, our early 8 a.m. service served communion every single Sunday. So I would be up there in a robe serving communion every week, and I would say it when it was my turn to serve the bread. I would say, this is the body broken for you. And if it was my turn to serve the cup, I would say, this is the cup poured out, shed for you. I can remember I had done this so many times every week, it just kind of became a little bit of a routine. And then I was on a women's retreat. And this time I wasn't actually serving the elements of communion, I was receiving them. And when I stepped up to receive communion, the person that was serving me said, this is the body and blood of Christ broken and shed for you, Jennifer. And it just took me back for a second. It actually kind of made me startle for a second because I'd never really heard my name in that sentence. I knew the story, but I hadn't really put myself in the story. If you consider yourself someone who knows the story, when was the last time you remembered that you were in it? If you've never considered that anything that happened over 2,000 years ago has anything to do with you, what does it look like for you to consider that you might be in the story? Paul says it this way. He says, this is my body, which is for you. which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. I am not just a great rabbi or a good teacher or a great example, but a broken body, broken and poured out for you. You know, if you've been here at North Point with us for a while, maybe you come from a tradition that does communion weekly and you've wondered, like, do they ever do communion here? It's fair. We actually celebrate communion often within our LDG and some of our other small groups. We actually see Jesus do communion that night of Passover with a small group, so we think that intimate setting is preferred. But we also celebrate communion sometimes as a staff, as well as when we all gather together for North Point together. But if you've grown up in a tradition that's something you've seen every week, I can understand why you would wonder that. Or maybe you grew up in a tradition that you did that every week, but no one ever talked to you about what it was about. And all you ever understood was a bunch of rules of who could, who couldn't. Do we ring a bell? Do we break the bread? Do we dip it in the cup? What do we do with the cup? Why is there a napkin thing? Who can say? There's a lot of rules. And I would encourage you, if that's you grew up in a system that you didn't ever actually understand, I would encourage you to go read about this moment yourself and see how many rules you find, because we think Jesus just says, hey, stop and remember. Remember who you are. You know, I don't know, I know we don't celebrate communion here weekly. Part of that reason is because we want North Point to be a place that you can belong before you believe. And the reality is we know that over 50% of our people have not attended church prior, and if you are new, it might be weird to have a lot of body and blood language, and we get that. But we didn't want to have a conversation about the importance of remembering what God has done without giving you the opportunity to remember through communion. Now, if you are someone who aren't sure what you believe about North Point, definitely aren't sure what you believe about God, all that makes total sense, and you are absolutely free just to sit, maybe remember and ponder your questions, maybe remember what even brought you in here this morning, but you do not have to participate in this at all. But if you're someone who considers yourself a follower of Christ, I just want to give you the space to remember. I don't know what you need to remember. I don't know what moment God has marked in your life. I don't know the last time you stopped. You remember that time that you heard that song and it made all the difference? Or you remember that time that you knew you weren't going to get through that dark season? That the only way you were going to get over on the other side of that was if God carried you, but you kind of forgot about it? Or you forgot about maybe the first time you decided to take a step toward Jesus? I don't know. Everybody's got a different moment that God has marked with them, but we want to give you space to consider that. And then also, we want to mark a moment together. We are about to step into a new chapter. I don't know how long you've been here with us. If you're new, again, I know, just kind of sit back with us for a minute. But if you've been here for a while, do you remember the first time you ever showed up? The first invite you got from a neighbor? Probably an invite from a Camp 75, most likely. Do you remember the time that volunteer finally gave you a moment where you felt seen and valued? Do you remember that moment that you invested in someone else? You know, it's funny, I've only been here 7 years. And in 7 years, I can tell you that I remember the first Sunday we walked up. Those red shirt people were everywhere. They were everywhere. And we were so scared in our move that our boys would not transition well. So I remember the first time my oldest son, Kyle, got called by his small group leader, Eric Starks, and invited to go see a superhero Marvel movie. I remember where they went. I remember how excited we were, how thankful we were that he had found a way to connect. I remember my first community group. These women are still massive in my life. I remember my Inside Out small group girls who are now halfway through college. I remember when I got to see my sons leading and serving at a whole nother level through Camp 75. See, guys, we are about to open our doors, and there's going to be a lot of new moments. There's going to be a lot of new people. That's what makes the remembering all the more important. So I'm going to ask our guest services team to come forward, and they are going to pass baskets, and there's going to be a set. I'm going to ask that you just hold on to this for a second. Don't do anything with it. I will talk us through it. We're going to do this together. But as they pass, and again, if you don't want to participate, please just let the basket pass you by. That's absolutely okay. But I just want to invite you to ask God maybe what moment he has marked with you that you have forgotten. Maybe think back to the first time you showed up here, or think back to the first time you took that step toward Jesus. I don't know. It's going to be different for each of us. But that you would stop that you would invite God to show you the moment that he has marked, and not for the sake of the moment itself, but because of what he's trying to show you right now. What he's trying to remind you of, because it matters in what you're going through right now. So I'm going to give you the space to sit as we pass that and reflect on that as well. There'll be a question on the screen for you just to reflect on. So I want to talk us through this together. You're going to notice there are two layers. If you've never participated in communion with this is actually the first week I've ever done this. I'm used to the big loaf of bread that you rip off and you dip in the cup. Not as hygienic, but this is nice. So there's a couple of layers on here, you'll notice. And so you're going to peel back that first layer. It's going to expose a wafer. It's wafer and juice. And I'm just going to talk us through communion, and we're going to eat the wafer and drink the cup together at the same time. We stop and we have this moment together. I don't know what God needs you to remember as an individual, or maybe what he's brought to mind collectively here as a part of what we're doing in our new chapter. But we remember because on the night that Christ was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it and he passed it to those around him, and he said, "Take and eat, for this is my body, broken for you." This is why we remember. This is why we eat the bread. You'll peel that second layer back. And likewise, he took the cup. And after he gave thanks, he passed it around to those around him, and he said, "This cup is the new covenant I make with you. This is my blood poured for you and for many, for the world." So whenever you drink of this, eat of this bread and drink of this cup, you proclaim who I am. This is why we drink the cup. This is why we remember. Let's drink. Because when we do this together, we're reminded who God is, what he did through the cross, and who we are. You know, not too long ago, my husband and I asked our kids, out of all the trips and vacations that we've ever taken, which was your favorite? You want to guess which one they picked? Disney. I think it's because they remember well. And it can be hard for me to remember well. My prayer for you is that you remember exactly what God has marked in your life, and that you would remember well, that you would intentionally remember, so it can move you into your new chapter, into our new chapter well. Let me pray for you. Father, we thank you for the gift of your Son, that through his life, death, and resurrection, we can be in relationship with you. Lord, we thank you that you've always been for us. God, you are aware and we are aware that we drift, that we forget, and we need to remember. We need to be re-anchored. We need to be reminded of who you are, what you have done for us, the price that you have paid for us, and who that actually makes us. Thank you for marking moments in our lives. Thank you for marking this moment with us together. Thank you for this chapter in this building, in this season, and we are so thankful that we take everything that you gave us here and we move it into this new chapter with intention. There's going to be so many new people, so many new things that makes the remembering all the more important. Help us to remember well. In Jesus' name, we thank you, Lord. Amen. Guys, thank you so much. There'll be trash cans on the exit. You can take your cups.